Well, good evening and welcome back to Sunday Evening Devotions. We pick up our story in the latter part of Joshua. We want to look at Joshua's chapter 13 through 22 tonight. A rather large section, but it encompasses the last part, or the second part, of Joshua's responsibilities. His first responsibility was to lead the people of Israel and to break the power or structure of the Canaanites, to conquer the land. Well, Joshua has done that, so the major city-states had been conquered and defeated. What then remained was the distribution of the land to the various tribes of Israel. You may remember, and the book of Joshua recounts for us in the 13th chapter, how that the two tribes, Reuben and Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh had received land on the east side of the Jordan River, and so that part's recounted for us under what Moses had done. So it then remained for Joshua to distribute the land to the other 9 tribes, and that was done by the process of lots. But Israel was, like us, fearful, uncertain, and not full of faith in terms of willing to take up the land. I mean, the major cities have been broken, but there were still Canaanites living in villages and towns and occupying the land, and it was not going to be just easy. They were going to have to fight for their particular possessions. So the Lord stirred up the heart of Caleb. Now remember, Caleb was Joshua's contemporary, so he was an older man in his 80s now, and he had been one of the faithful spies that had been sent into the land previously. And so he decides, by the Lord's prompting, that he would take up his inheritance, and the tribe of Judah from which he was from supports him. And so they get the first section, which is the southern part of Israel, the land. And in particular, then, Caleb decides to take on his possession and lead his family to take up the land that was owned near Hebron. And so God blesses them and they take that land. But they don't get rid of all of them because God has a process here in sanctification. In particular, the city of the Jebusites is left, that is Jerusalem. And of course, David will take that city at some later point. So Joshua encourages the other tribes. They're reluctant, and he reminds them of their responsibilities, and the lots are handed out, and we have the story unfolding as each tribe takes up its possession. Now then at the end of that whole section, Joshua gets his allotment, and in the tribe of Ephraim, and he sort of then disappears. As it were, he retires. He's an older man as well, but the point is that he has no desire to be the king because the Lord is king. And so the land is distributed to the various tribes, and the wars and the battles continue. Now, there's a couple of things that we can probably learn from this text. Number one is the process of lots. When we think of lots, we often think of something like, well, our modern day use of, die, right? We have games games of chance, and we roll the die, and we see how the laws of probability work out. Or maybe we flip a coin, heads or tails. And again, the laws of probability play into that. But you see, the whole process of the idea of lots is that it is God who decided how the die roll, how the coin flips. In the case of Joshua, it might have been the Urim and the Thummim that was in the priest's breastplate, designating that God is the one who determines the outcome of the lots. And this is akin and relates to the doctrine of providence. We don't always understand God's providence. In God's providence, he allows bad things to happen, difficult things to happen, because he has a higher good in mind. That is, that we learn by struggle, and Israel was to learn through struggle, and indeed to exercise its faith that God would provide for them and take care of them. Well, in a similar manner, then, each of us, as we're told in the book of Ephesians, that grace is given to us according to the measure of Christ's gift. Some are given more grace than others, and in the end, we will have an inheritance in heaven that is designated to us by God. The great truth and comfort is that Christ, the new Joshua, has gone before us and conquered death and sin that we might have that inheritance. And just like Joshua had made sure that the people of Israel had conquered the land and were able to inherit it, in a greater way, Christ has accomplished this victory that we would have the comfort that we now have a secure inheritance. But getting there is living by faith. And that's what this life is all about. It's living by faith in the power and the certainty of Jesus Christ who's gone before us. Because he has conquered death. He has conquered our enemies. And yeah, it's a struggle. And yeah, there are things that we are yet to experience. And all this is to teach us to exercise faith, to trust in God and not trust ourselves. The people of Israel had to learn it in a very practical or earthly sense. We learn it in a spiritual sense, but nonetheless it has practical and earthly consequences. We live by faith in this life, but you know what? Our faith is not a vain faith. It's not just a blind faith. It is a faith that is rooted in the new Joshua, the Joshua who has secured for us our inheritance. Well, that's good news. Good night.